This is not going to be the kind of day with one big headline storm, and that's exactly why today is dangerous. Because the days that don't make headlines are the days people let their guard down. Right now, there are 5 completely separate severe weather threats lighting up across this country, from the Dakotas all the way down to the Carolinas. And one of those threats alone is sitting over more than 34 million people who probably have no idea it's even in the forecast. One map, 5 threats, 34 million people. Let that sink in for a second. Before we get into the specifics, let me quickly explain how the Storm Prediction Center actually grades a day like today, because it matters for everything I'm about to show you. There are 5 categories, from marginal at the bottom, up through slight, enhanced, moderate, and finally high at the very top. Most of what we're dealing with today falls into just the bottom 2 categories, marginal and slight. That might sound tame, but marginal and slight days still injure people and destroy property every single year. Mostly because nobody's expecting it. Stick with me, because at the halfway mark, I'm going to show you the exact 3-hour window tonight when South Dakota could get hit by a line of storms with gusts over 70 miles an hour. And later, I'll tell you exactly which part of southern Arizona is about to get storms that don't even show up on the map yet this morning. If you're new here, go ahead and hit subscribe. And if there's something on your heart you want me to pray over today, drop it in the comments. I read every one. I get comments sometimes asking why I bother covering a marginal or slight risk day instead of waiting for something bigger. And honestly, this is exactly why. It's not the 5 out of 5 days that catch the most people off guard. It's the ordinary Tuesdays. July is normally one of the most active months for this kind of scattered severe weather because you've got long days of strong heating combined with plenty of moisture already setting in the atmosphere. Most summer severe threats aren't tied to some huge storm system. They're tied to nothing more dramatic than a hot afternoon and enough instability to set off backyard-level storms that can still do real damage. All right, let's get into it, starting with the sharpest threat on the board today. The northern high plains into the upper Midwest. This is the one area today carrying a level 2 slight risk, and it's the one I want you watching closest. A weak shortwave trough is already pushing showers and storms northeast across eastern Montana and western North Dakota, and that activity keeps sliding east through the day. Quick definition for anybody newer to the channel. A shortwave trough is basically a small dip in the upper level winds that helps lift air and trigger storms. Think of it as a little nudge that gets the atmosphere moving. But that first round isn't the real story. The real story is what builds behind it. A warm front is expected to sharpen up as yesterday's cold front swings back north out of South Dakota, with moist air surging in underneath a much stronger trough. When a warm front sharpens like that, it basically draws a clear boundary between warm, moist air on one side and cooler, drier air on the other. And that boundary becomes the focus for the strongest storms. Farther west, moist upslope flow and steep mid-level lapse rates are going to destabilize the atmosphere fast. Upslope flow just means air is being forced to rise as it moves toward higher ground. And steep lapse rates mean the atmosphere cools quickly with height. Put those two together and you get an atmosphere that wants to bubble up into storms. We're talking MLCAPE of 1,000 to 2,000 joules per kilogram, with effective shear of 40 to 50 knots. In plain English, that's enough fuel and enough spin to build real supercells. CAPE is basically a measure of how much energy is available for a storm to use once it gets going. And shear is how much the wind changes with height. High CAPE gives a storm power. Strong shear gives it organization and rotation. Supercells capable of large hail and damaging gusts. Full stop. And here's the part I told you about at the very start. One or more of these storms could grow into a Boeing segment, a broken line of storms capable of gusts over 70 miles an hour, crossing South Dakota tonight. A Boeing segment is exactly what it sounds like. a line of storms that bulges outward in the middle like a bow, and that bulge is where you get the strongest straight-line winds. That's the 3-hour window I mentioned. That's the one I want you tracking closest. Forecasters are honest that pinning down the exact corridor is tough right now because outflow boundaries and new storm development are colliding right around the Montana, Wyoming, South Dakota border. And that kind of collision is genuinely hard to predict 12 hours out. An outflow boundary is the leftover cool air pushed out ahead of an existing storm. When a new storm runs into one of those boundaries, it can either get a boost or get completely disrupted. And right now, nobody can say for certain which one happens tonight. Farther east, along that same warm front, once the low-level jet strengthens tonight, expect large to very large hail before those storms grow into bowing clusters of their own. The low-level jet is a fast ribbon of wind a few thousand feet up that tends to strengthen after sunset. And when it does, it can pump even more moisture and energy into storms that are already going. A few more storms fire from southeast Wyoming into northeast Colorado and the Nebraska Panhandle this afternoon, where a deep, well-mixed atmosphere supports isolated severe gusts and some hail. If you're anywhere near Minneapolis, Plymouth, Brooklyn Park, Eden Prairie, or up toward Billings, this is your zone tonight. Almost 3 million people sit inside this risk area alone. If that's you, drop your city below right now. I want to know what it actually looks like outside your window. Picture a normal evening in the Twin Cities suburbs. Grills going, kids still out on bikes. And by the time that Boeing line rolls through, the difference between a scary noise outside and a tree through a roof can come down to whether the patio furniture was still sitting out. Now let's swing all the way to the Great Basin, because northeast Nevada and northern Utah have their own separate story brewing this afternoon. A modest trough moving through, combined with just enough moisture and lift, is going to fire isolated to scattered storms on top of a deep, well-mixed atmosphere. The updrafts won't be dramatic, but high cloud bases sitting on very steep, low-level lapse rates mean any storm that matures can still throw down a locally severe wind gust. Here's why high cloud bases matter. The higher up the rain has to fall from, the more it evaporates on the way down. And that evaporational cooling can accelerate the air falling out of the storm, sometimes into a sudden, sharp gust, even from a storm that doesn't look all that impressive. If you're camping or hiking anywhere in that Nevada or Utah high country this afternoon, this is exactly the kind of setup that catches people off guard on what looks like a clear day. Drop south into southern Arizona. And here's the second thing I promised you. Nothing is showing on radar yet this morning, but increased mid-level moisture is going to fire storms over the higher terrain by afternoon. And some of that activity could push down into the lower elevations later in the day. That's the classic Arizona summer pattern. Storms build over the mountains first because the terrain forces air upward. And then, if the flow aloft cooperates, that activity can slide down into the valleys where most people actually live. That means people who looked outside this morning and saw nothing but sun could still get caught by a strong gust before the evening's out. Threat number 4, and it's the one almost nobody is watching this morning. East Texas into the Sabine River Valley. Satellite already shows a broad upper-level low parked over the Mid-South with a weak vorticity max sliding through southern Arkansas and northern Louisiana. A vorticity max is just a pocket of spin in the atmosphere, and wherever it tracks, it tends to drag extra lift along with it, which is exactly what's happening here. A few storms are already going in that zone, and coverage builds through the afternoon as that disturbance runs into a moist, unstable air mass already sitting in place. Shear is weak, so don't expect organized lines. But loosely organized cold pools are enough to support sporadic damaging gusts, sometimes with almost no lead time at all. A cold pool is that pocket of dense, rain-cooled air sitting underneath a storm, and when it spreads out fast enough, it can produce a gust that hits well before any siren or alert has time to go off. In East Texas, this is the kind of afternoon where a backyard gathering can go from sunny to sideways rain in the time it takes to flip a burger. because these cold pool gusts don't wait for a warning to catch up to them. And threat number 5, the southern mid-Atlantic into the Carolinas. A moist, unstable air mass supports scattered storms starting over the Blue Ridge Mountains in the early afternoon, then expanding south into the central Carolinas along a weak lee trough. A lee trough forms on the downwind side of a mountain range, and it's a favorite spot for storms to fire first before drifting off the high terrain into the lowlands. Watch for sea breeze storms, too, running from the Virginia tidewater down along the coast. That happens because the land heats up faster than the ocean, and the cooler ocean air rushes in underneath the rising warm air over land. And that collision line is often enough to spark its own storms by itself. Shear stays weak here as well, but steep low-level lapse rates enhance the downdraft potential. So sporadic damaging wind is the main concern, especially if any of these clusters manage to come together. In the Carolinas, this is exactly the kind of afternoon where a youth soccer practice or a golf outing gets caught out in the open, because the storms sliding off the Blue Ridge don't always show up clearly on a phone radar app until they're already close. So here's the shape of today in one sentence. A smaller, sharper threat up in the northern plains and upper Midwest against a much bigger, more scattered risk zone stretching from the Great Basin to the Carolinas. That bigger zone alone covers more than 34 million people, including Dallas, Fort Worth, Charlotte, Tucson, and Virginia Beach. Small area, sharper punch in one spot. Huge area, lower odds per location, but spread across almost the entire southern half of the country. This is actually a pretty normal pattern for early July. You get one organized threat tied to a real trough, and then a scattering of pop-up storms riding on nothing more than daytime heating and a moist atmosphere. The difference matters, because the organized threat in the northern plains is the one worth losing sleep over, while the scattered threats further south are more about not being caught outside at the wrong 10 minutes. None of these 5 threats, on their own, is going to be the storm that leads tonight's news. That's exactly the problem. Days like this happen dozens of times every summer across this country, and most of them come and go without a single injury, precisely because people who watch a channel like this one know to take the small stuff seriously. Here's what I actually want you to do with all of that. South Dakota, North Dakota, Minnesota, anywhere near that Montana, Wyoming, South Dakota border tonight, get anything that can turn into a projectile off the driveway before dark. Large hail is your #1 threat if a supercell holds together over you. Know the difference tonight, too. A severe thunderstorm watch means conditions are favorable. A warning means a storm has actually been spotted or indicated on radar, and you need to act right then, not later. Great Basin and southern Arizona. These are quick, pop-up storms. If you're driving through higher terrain this afternoon, give yourself extra following distance and don't be surprised by a sudden gust out of nowhere. East Texas and the Sabine River Valley. Keep an eye on the sky, even without a big warning attached. These cold pool gusts can arrive with almost no notice. Carolinas and the southern mid-Atlantic, if you've got anything outside this afternoon. The Blue Ridge storms will beat the coastal ones to you, so build your exit plan into the front half of your day, not the back half. And for absolutely everybody watching today, no matter which zone you're in, keep your phone charged. A dying battery in the middle of a power outage or a stalled car is its own kind of emergency. And one more thing that applies to every single zone today. If you've got an elderly neighbor or someone who lives alone nearby, a quick text or a knock on the door to make sure they know what's coming cost you 30 seconds and could matter a lot more than that. If you've got any driving planned later today anywhere near these 5 zones, check your route one more time before you leave. Not because any of these storms are going to shut down a highway for hours, but because a sudden downburst at highway speed is a different kind of dangerous than the same wind hitting your house. One more time, drop your city in the comments right now. I read every single one, and I'll come back with specifics for your area. And if you know somebody in Minneapolis, Dallas, Charlotte, Tucson, or Virginia Beach who has no idea 5 separate threats are lining up today, Send this to them right now. One map, 5 threats, 34 million people who mostly don't know it yet. Now you do. I'll be back tonight with the update as these storms start firing, so make sure your notifications are on. This pattern is going to keep evolving over the next few days as high pressure tries to build in from the west. So I'll have another update as soon as tomorrow's outlook is out. If this is the kind of forecast that actually helps you plan your day, that's exactly why I make these. So if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe. Stay weather aware out there. Keep an eye on each other. And God bless. I'll see you in the next one.